the, into the economy,
into the market.
into
Yeah,
the
and getting
market.
back, I mean,
Yeah,
people who have cannabis arrests more often than not are banned from being market participants when they come out.
that's right.
It's wrong. It's
Yeah,
just wrong.
you're so right about that. And they have a wealth of knowledge, especially those
Yes.
who are, growing and dealing. They know their market, they know their stuff. And, what kind of valuable resource could they offer to cannabis entrepreneurs who need people who really understand the plant and what it can do? And so, yeah, it's absurd. I know that in so many states where it's legal for medical or adult use, they prohibit people with criminal records from obtaining a license. And why? It makes no sense to me. But this goes back to the importance of this platform that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel blessed to have it, to be able to get this word out. But for people who aren't already familiar with it, how do we go about piquing their interest if they wouldn't search for cannabis online?
Oh boy. So, building an audience is tough. We just published our 100th episode. And the audience builds on itself slowly. What we have done intentionally is to bring on, cultural icons like Ziggy Marley, like Mike Tyson, like Jay Muse, who is the actor who's Jay in Silent Bob. We've had film directors on. We really try and get, at least one out of every 10 episodes to be cultural and not just cannabis or cannabis business. The people are going to find this the same way that they find the plant. They will feel like they need to look for something, and the average consumer hopefully is going to listen to your show or my show and get something out of it. Podcasts are a unique industry. There are something like 90,000 podcasts, and most of them have less than 100 listeners per episode. We're in the thousands of listeners an episode. I wish we were at the tens of thousands. Our goal was never to be Joe Rogan. I am, not Joe Rogan. I'm not nearly funny enough, and I have way more hair than he does. But the goal has always been to build a platform. Yeah, we say, we describe the Green Rush as, the intersection of cannabis, the capital markets, and culture, and a lot of bad dad jokes, because that's what I do. Bad dad jokes.
That's funny. I've had a few of those myself, but that's an interesting thing that you bring up, because we're on terrestrial radio. We don't go into the culture so much, and I think that's where you can, online. I think that's incredibly valuable, and it's great that you've been able to get some of these cultural icons on your show. We've had a couple, but I try not to get into so much of the cultural vernacular that would have these conservative radio stations ban me from.
Well, look, I've been good. I have not cursed. I mean, there is a ton of cursing on my show, because that's how people speak, and I want my guests to feel comfortable being who they are. I'm not, Mike Wallace coming up to somebody and trying to dig and get dirt. I really want to have a conversation, just like you and I are having right now, where people can reveal who they are, give information that the listener probably would not have had before. I mean, I try not to ask the same questions that a guest has been asked a million times. Ann Donahoe, who is my co-host, and I, and Nick Opich, who is our producer, and Shay Gunther is the producer. We all do real research on the guests to try and understand who they are as people, not only who they are as cannabis market participants. And I just want to have a good conversation. Like, ideally, the audience is listening, and it's like they just they're at a Starbucks and they're overhearing something really interesting, or they're at a diner, somewhere having a cup of coffee and they're overhearing a really fascinating conversation. That's what I want, because that's what I want to hear. Like I want to I actually go back and listen to every episode after it's published, because when I'm in the conversation, I lose a lot of what is being said because I'm so interested in having a good conversation that sometimes I don't hear everything that the guest is saying. And when I go back and listen, it's like listening to somebody else have this conversation. It's really fun for me. I know Anne winces. Some people can't watch themselves if they're an actor or an actress on TV. They can't watch themselves. Others really look to learn. I really go back and look to learn after each episode on, I should have asked this follow-up, or I should have asked that question. I missed an opportunity there because something happened in the conversation that took it in a different direction. And for me, that's the coolest part about podcasting in general, is it is a conversation. If it's done intentionally that way, it is really fascinating. And I love podcasts. I listen to them all the time.
Yeah, I do too. And it's funny, there have been 2 or 3 occasions where a guest has asked me to provide them with questions, and I've almost never followed that script because I find that it really impedes the conversation, and guests surprise me. You've surprised me. We've talked about things that I wasn't anticipating, and that's what's so beautiful.
Hopefully
about
it's a pleasant surprise.
Oh yeah, no, it's good. That's why I don't write questions. I'll put a topic together, and I do research ad nauseum. I know my guests inside out and backwards as much as I can, derived from public forums like Mr. Google. But if I don't know a guest, I'll make sure that I find out before the episode, and then I just let the guest almost guide the questioning and the conversation and everything else. And I think that is hospitable for people who are just getting to know this industry, or they're just cannabis curious and want to understand that this is an important issue, and it's something that can be very normalized. It doesn't have to be something people are afraid of or afraid to talk about.
I do it from a podcast perspective. We do it differently. We actually do script the questions out and we give them to the guest ahead of time. We don't always, actually, we never follow the script as it is. It's directional, but we want to give, I don't want to surprise the guest. And we do have an intention in every interview of covering certain topics. So if I knew that when I was talking with Kevin Murphy from Acreage Holdings, I wanted to talk to him about the deal with Canopy Growth, and I was talking to him after Bruce Linton had left Canopy, and I wanted to touch on that a little bit because the relationship between Bruce and Kevin was the crux of how the deal got done. And what does that mean now that the deal is over? But he's a public company CEO, and I don't want to put him in a position where I'm asking him a question about the business and having him reveal something material or not reveal something in a way because it is material. So I don't want to shock these people. I want to give them the opportunity to have a good conversation. Like I said, I'm not a journalist. I am a public relations executive, and I'm a cannabis market person. So I just want to have a chat. And I want to know what's on, what's inbounds and out of bounds. And that's not what everybody does. I mean, I think I love this conversation. I'm having a great time. And I hope your audience is enjoying it. And if you like listening to me talk, you should check out the Green Rush podcast. It's on iTunes and Stitcher and Google and wherever else you listen to podcasts. But we do try and have a structure, and we also ask 2 questions of every guest because I think they are revelatory about who they are as people. I always ask about failure. I don't believe, and we tend to interview people who are successful, but I don't think that you are successful by accident. And I think most people are successful because they learn from their mistakes. And I want to know about the biggest mistakes that people have made. And it is a really challenging question for most people because it is very rare that somebody is truly disclosed as to the mistakes that they have made in their life, whether they be business or personal, and how it has impacted them as they've gone forward. And the people who are most transparent about that are far and away the most interesting people that I've had the opportunity to talk with, and some of them have become friends. I'll give you an example. I'm a big fan of a guy named Matt Gerson, who is the CEO of a company called Foria, which is a California-based cannabis company that's focused on women's sexual health. They make lube, suppositories, pre-rolls, and other things. And Matt is absolutely fascinating. And when I asked him the question about failure, he gave the most honest, authentic answer I think I've heard yet. And I enjoyed it so much that when I went to LA a couple weeks ago, I made sure to spend time with him. And he was that same person face to face as he was on the interview, and as somebody who has become a friend. I've had others who either refused to answer the question or danced around it, and you could tell that they were just not as authentic. And it's a bummer, because I want to know who these people are as people. It's not just talking about the numbers. It's talking about, what does this industry mean to you? Why are you involved in it? What can others learn from you? And the other question that we ask is, what is the one story that is not being told by the mainstream media? It could be about your company, but more importantly, what are we all missing about cannabis? Because these are people who are in the trenches and who know what's going on. And that always is an interesting answer, and it always surprises me. It is almost never about themselves. It is almost always about an issue that either I haven't thought about or Ann hasn't thought about, but they have, and it's just fun. It's just a great question.
That's really great. I really love that you do that. What's the most common answer about what's not being addressed in the media?
If you had asked me that 6 months ago, it would have been about veterans access. Social equity and social justice are big topics. For the business guys, it's often about 280E, the IRS rule, about how you can book cost of business expenses. But it ranges. It ranges from issues on traumatic head injuries and the use of cannabis to help treat that, or PTSD, or it could be issues on access for former athletes. It's like as many different strains as there are to the plant, there are answers to that question.
And that's interesting. Yeah, I can see that. And a lot of those things are, what we can talk about in these forums. And really, it takes a cannabis media person to pull those issues out. And I think that the value of having these platforms is that if people are interested in learning more about those things, I've watched recently, there's been a lot more coverage about cannabis, but again, go back to those 3-minute sound bites. The segments really don't last that long, with the exception of maybe Sanjay Gupta, doing his
he's done a great.
And that opened a lot of doors for people in the industry, and it removed that black sheep syndrome of people feeling afraid to talk about it openly in the public. And because the stigma has always been so thick, you could cut it with a knife. And what he did on such a mainstream, widely viewed platform was bring cannabis into legitimacy as an issue. And I thought that was really fascinating. So if you look at the last couple of weeks, you'll see, 60 Minutes did a segment, Anderson Cooper did a segment on psychedelics and the work that's being done at Johns Hopkins, which I think is going to have the same type of impact culturally that Weed did, the documentary series you're talking about with Sanjay Gupta. We are, as a society, I think, going through a really interesting change in the way that we look at ourselves. And I'm not even referring to what's going on in the White House. I'm really referring specifically to health and wellness. And, cannabis is the first thing that is taking place. But,
psilocybin, MDMA, ketamine. We are facing a mental health crisis in this country. 40% of adults have some form of diagnosed, untreated mental disease. It could be depression, it could be anxiety, it's OCD, it's addiction, it's PTSD. These are all issues that cannabis can help address. There are issues that others can help